The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Clarence House as Queen Camilla stood at her bedroom window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the roses she had personally selected years ago. The delicate pink blooms reminded her of simpler times, when her biggest concern was choosing the right variety for the garden rather than navigating the complex waters of royal duty and public scrutiny. At 76, Camilla had learned to find peace in these quiet moments before the day's obligations began. She had always been an early riser, a habit formed during her childhood in the English countryside, but these days, the early hours served a different purpose. They offered solitude, a precious commodity in a life lived under constant observation. The soft knock on her door interrupted her reverie. "Your Majesty," came the gentle voice of Margaret, her lady-in-waiting for the past 8 years. "His Majesty requests your presence in his study when you're ready." Camilla's reflection in the window glass showed a woman who had weathered many storms. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, even in the early morning, and her blue eyes held the wisdom that came from decades of public service, though they also carried traces of the weariness that had become more pronounced in recent months. "Thank you, Margaret. Please tell him I'll be down shortly," Camilla replied, her voice carrying the refined accent that had become synonymous with royal broadcasts and official engagements. As she made her way through the familiar corridors of Clarence House, Camilla's mind wandered to the events that had brought her to this moment. The journey from Camilla Shand, a young woman with a love of horses and country life, to Queen Consort had been anything but conventional. She had faced criticism, scrutiny, and public disapproval that would have broken lesser spirits. Yet she had persevered with a dignity that eventually won over even her harshest critics. The study door was slightly ajar, and through it, she could see Charles seated behind his antique mahogany desk, the one that had belonged to his grandfather, King George VI. Papers were scattered across its surface, and she noticed the familiar furrow in his brow that appeared whenever he was grappling with particularly weighty matters of state. King Charles III, even at 75, maintained the erect posture and commanding presence that had defined him throughout his decades as Prince of Wales and now as monarch. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he wore one of his favored navy suits, the kind that had become his signature look through countless public appearances. "Good morning, darling," Camilla said as she entered, her voice carrying the warmth that had always been reserved for their private moments together. Charles looked up from his papers, and she immediately noticed something different in his expression. There was a gravity there, a weight that seemed heavier than usual. After more than 2 decades of marriage and a lifetime of shared experiences, she could read his moods like pages in a well-loved book. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to the comfortable armchair positioned across from his desk. It was the same chair where she had sat countless times before, discussing everything from state matters to family concerns, from garden plans to charitable initiatives. The morning light filtering through the tall windows illuminated the study's rich tapestries and oil paintings depicting centuries of British history. This room had witnessed countless important conversations, decisions that had shaped the monarchy and the nation. Today it would witness another. Camilla settled into the chair, arranging her morning dress with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to formal protocol. She had chosen a soft lavender color that morning, one that complemented her complexion and reflected her preference for understated elegance. "Charles, what's troubling you?" she asked, her intuition telling her that this was more than a routine discussion about their schedule or upcoming engagements. He set down his fountain pen, the same one he had used to sign countless documents since becoming king, and leaned back in his chair. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of unspoken words and the gravity of whatever revelation was to come. "I've received some concerning information from my medical team," he began, his voice steady but lacking its usual confidence. "Information that will affect not just me, but you, our family, and ultimately the entire monarchy." Camilla felt her heart skip a beat. In their years together, she had seen Charles face numerous challenges with unwavering resolve. Political crises, family scandals, public criticism, He had weathered them all with the stoic determination that had been drilled into him from childhood. But this was different, something that requires immediate attention and will likely require significant changes to how we approach our duties going forward. The implication hung in the air between them. Camilla had been through health scares before, both personally and with family members. She understood the delicate dance of medical uncertainty, the way hope and fear intertwined in the waiting rooms of specialists, and the careful language doctors used when delivering difficult news. "How serious?" she asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Charles turned back to face her, and in that moment she saw not the King of England, but the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. The man who had wooed her with poetry and long walks through the countryside, who had shared his deepest fears and highest aspirations during their courtship and marriage. "Serious enough that we need to make some difficult decisions about the future," he replied. "Decisions that will affect your role, your position, everything we've built together." The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Camilla had spent years building her reputation as queen consort, carefully crafting a public persona that honored the crown while remaining true to her authentic self. She had championed causes close to her heart, from literacy programs to domestic violence awareness, and had gradually won over a public that had once been skeptical of her place in the royal family. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together," she said, rising from her chair and moving toward him. "We always have." Charles reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become second nature over their decades together. But even in this familiar comfort, she could feel the tremor of uncertainty that ran beneath his composed exterior. "The treatment options are extensive," he continued. "They'll require extended periods of rest, regular medical appointments, and potentially long stays away from public duties. The doctors are optimistic about the prognosis, but they've been very clear about the demands the treatment will place on both of us." Camilla absorbed this information, her mind already racing through the implications. Royal duties were not easily postponed or delegated. State visits, ceremonial functions, charitable patronages, the machinery of the monarchy required constant attention and presence. Extended absences would necessitate significant adjustments and would inevitably become public knowledge. "And my role during this time?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "That's what we need to discuss," Charles said, leading her to sit beside him on the study's leather sofa. "The palace advisors have been working through various scenarios, but ultimately the decision rests with us." The morning sun had risen higher, casting a warmer glow through the study windows. Outside, the sounds of London continued. Traffic, construction, the distant hum of the city going about its business. But inside this room, time seemed suspended as two people who had dedicated their lives to service contemplated an uncertain future. Camilla thought about the young woman she had been when she first met Charles, long before either of them could have imagined the path their lives would take. She had been content with her quiet country life, involved in local charities and community activities, never dreaming that she would one day sit in Clarence House as queen consort, discussing matters that would affect millions of people across the Commonwealth. "What are the options?" she asked, her practical nature asserting itself. Throughout their marriage, she had been the one to ask the difficult questions, to push for clarity when emotions threatened to cloud judgment. Charles pulled out a folder from his desk drawer, one that bore the official seal of the royal medical household. Inside were documents that represented hours of consultation, second opinions, and carefully considered medical advice. "The primary treatment protocol requires intensive sessions 3 times a week for the next 6 months," he explained, opening the folder to reveal charts and treatment schedules. "During this time, my energy levels will be significantly reduced, and I'll need to minimize stress and public appearances, which means I would need to take on additional responsibilities," Camilla said, already understanding the implications. "In the short term, yes. But the advisors have also suggested that we consider a more permanent adjustment to our roles." The word permanent hung heavy in the air. Camilla had always known that their positions came with great responsibility, but also with the understanding that duty continued regardless of personal circumstances. Kings and queens had ruled through wars, economic crises, and personal tragedies. The idea of stepping back was almost unprecedented in modern royal history. "They're recommending that I consider abdication," Charles said quietly, the words barely audible even in the silence of the study. Camilla felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Abdication was not merely a personal decision, but a constitutional event that would reshape the monarchy and the line of succession. It would mean that William would assume the throne decades earlier than anyone had anticipated, with all the pressures and responsibilities that entailed. "And my position?" she asked, though she already understood the implications. "If I abdicate, your role as queen consort would end," Charles explained. "You would return to being the Duchess of Cornwall, but your official duties would be significantly reduced. The new king and queen would take on the primary responsibilities of state." The magnitude of this potential change washed over her. For years, she had carefully built her role within the royal family, establishing patronages, developing relationships with charitable organizations, and slowly winning over a public that had once viewed her with suspicion. The thought of stepping away from all of that work, from the platform she had used to make a difference in countless lives, was both liberating and devastating. "What do you want to do?" she asked, focusing on his needs rather than her own feelings about the situation. "I want to beat this thing," Charles said with a determination that reminded her of the man who had waited decades to become king. "But I also want to be realistic about what the treatment will require and fair to the institution we serve." They sat in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the future. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked steadily, marking the passage of time that suddenly felt both precious and uncertain. "The doctors want to begin treatment immediately," Charles continued, "which means we have very little time to make these decisions and prepare for the changes they'll bring." Camilla understood the urgency. Medical treatments often required prompt action, and delays could affect outcomes. But the idea of making such momentous decisions under time pressure felt overwhelming. "What about William and Catherine?" she asked. "Have they been informed?" "I spoke with William yesterday," Charles replied. "He's prepared to take on additional responsibilities immediately, but he's also concerned about the pressure this will place on Catherine and the children." The ripple effects of royal health issues extended far beyond the immediate family. William and Catherine had 3 young children and had been carefully balancing their royal duties with their desire to provide their children with as normal a childhood as possible. Suddenly, accelerating William's path to the throne would dramatically alter their family dynamic. "And Harry?" Camilla asked, knowing that the relationship between Charles and his younger son remained complex and sometimes strained. "I plan to call him today," Charles said. "Regardless of our differences, he deserves to know what's happening." The morning had advanced, and Margaret appeared at the study door with a gentle knock. "Forgive the interruption, Your Majesties, but the Prime Minister is on the phone requesting to speak with His Majesty." Charles and Camilla exchanged glances. The Prime Minister's call was likely routine, but the timing felt significant. Soon, these conversations would need to involve government officials, constitutional experts, and palace advisors. The private nature of their current discussion would give way to formal protocols and official announcements. "Tell him I'll call back within the hour," Charles instructed. "And please ask the private secretary to clear my afternoon schedule." As Margaret withdrew, Charles turned back to Camilla with an expression that mixed love, concern, and determination. "I need you to know that whatever we decide, whatever path we choose, it won't change how I feel about you or what you mean to me," he said. "You've been my partner through everything, the challenges, the criticism, the triumphs. I won't make any decision about the future without considering what it means for you." Camilla felt tears prick at her eyes, though she maintained the composure that had served her well throughout their public life together. "And you need to know that I'll support whatever decision is best for your health and for the monarchy," she replied. "That's what we pledged to each other and to the country." The study fell quiet again, save for the distant sounds of London morning traffic and the soft ticking of the antique clock. Two people who had spent their lives in service to others now faced the most personal and consequential decision of their time together. "There's something else," Charles said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The doctors want to announce my diagnosis publicly within the week. They believe transparency will help maintain public confidence and allow for the necessary adjustments to our schedule." This revelation added another layer of complexity to their situation. A public announcement would trigger intense media scrutiny, public speculation about the future of the monarchy, and inevitable questions about succession and continuity. The careful privacy they had maintained around this conversation would soon give way to the glaring spotlight of public attention. "How much detail will they share?" Camilla asked, her mind already anticipating the media frenzy that would follow any announcement about the king's health. "Enough to explain the treatment requirements and potential changes to our public schedule," Charles replied. "But they'll maintain patient confidentiality regarding specific medical details." The balance between transparency and privacy had always been delicate for the royal family. The public had a legitimate interest in the health of their monarch, but Charles and Camilla also deserved some measure of personal privacy during what would undoubtedly be a challenging period. As the morning sun reached its zenith, casting the study in bright, clear light, both Charles and Camilla understood that they stood at a crossroads that would define not only their personal future, but also the future of the monarchy itself. The decisions made in the coming days would echo through history, affecting not just their own lives, but the lives of their children, grandchildren, and the millions of people across the Commonwealth who look to the crown for stability and continuity. The weight of the crown, both literal and metaphorical, had never felt heavier than it did in that quiet study, as two people who had dedicated their lives to duty contemplated a future that would require them to redefine what service to their country might look like in the face of personal adversity. #The storm gathers the afternoon brought an urgency that hadn't existed in the morning's quiet contemplation. The king's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, had arrived at Clarence House with a briefcase full of constitutional documents and a grave expression that matched the weight of the situation. The study that had witnessed an intimate conversation between husband and wife now transformed into a war room where the future of the British monarchy would be carefully orchestrated. Camilla observed from her position near the window as Charles huddled with his advisors around the mahogany table. Maps of the Commonwealth, constitutional law books, and secure phones created a landscape of complexity that would have overwhelmed most people. But Charles moved through it all with the practiced ease of someone who had been preparing for kingship his entire life, even if the circumstances were far from what anyone had imagined. "The constitutional implications are significant," Sir Clive was saying, his voice carrying decades of experience in navigating royal protocol. "If His Majesty chooses to step back from duties, even temporarily, we need to implement the Regency Act provisions. If abdication becomes necessary, the process involves Parliament, the Privy Council, and all 15 Commonwealth realms." Camilla listened to these technical discussions while her own mind grappled with more personal concerns. The role of Queen Consort had taken years to develop and refine. She had worked tirelessly to establish her own charitable foundations, to support causes that mattered to her, and to create a public persona that complemented rather than competed with the institution of monarchy. The thought of stepping away from that work felt like abandoning not just a job, but a calling. Dr. Richardson, the royal physician, had joined the afternoon session to provide medical context for the decisions being discussed. His presence added a clinical reality to what might otherwise have been purely theoretical constitutional discussions. "The treatment protocol I've recommended is aggressive, but necessary," Dr. Richardson explained to the assembled group. "His Majesty's condition is entirely treatable, but it requires consistent medical attention and significant rest periods. The stress of full royal duties during this time could compromise the treatment's effectiveness." Charles nodded thoughtfully, his fingers drumming silently on the table in a gesture Camilla recognized as his way of processing complex information. She had seen him make this same gesture during countless difficult decisions over the years, from family crises to matters of state. Doctor, in your professional opinion, how long might this treatment period extend? Sir Clive asked, his pen poised over a legal pad filled with notes. Initially, we're looking at 6 months of intensive treatment, Dr. Richardson replied. However, full recovery and return to normal activity levels could take 12 to 18 months. During that time, His Majesty would need to carefully manage his energy and stress levels. The timeline sent ripples through the room. 18 months represented numerous state visits, ceremonial duties, and public engagements that would need to be canceled, postponed, or reassigned. The machinery of monarchy couldn't simply pause for medical treatment. Your Majesty, Sir Clive addressed Camilla directly. We need to discuss your role during this period. The constitutional experts believe you could temporarily assume many ceremonial duties, working in conjunction with other senior royals. This was the moment Camilla had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Throughout her years as Duchess of Cornwall and later as Queen Consort, she had always been the supporting player, the one who stood beside the monarch rather than in place of him. The prospect of stepping into a more prominent role felt both daunting and oddly liberating. What would that involve specifically? She asked, moving from the window to join the discussion at the table. State visits could continue with you as the primary representative, Sir Clive explained, consulting his notes. Ceremonial duties, patronage events, and most public engagements could proceed with minimal disruption. The key would be maintaining continuity for the public while allowing His Majesty the space needed for treatment. Charles looked up from his papers, his expression mixing gratitude and concern. Darling, this would place an enormous burden on you. The schedule alone would be overwhelming, not to mention the increased scrutiny and pressure. Camilla considered this carefully. The royal calendar was notoriously demanding under normal circumstances. Taking on additional responsibilities would mean longer days, more travel, and significantly less privacy. But it would also mean preserving the work they had both invested years in building. I think I can handle more than people might expect, she said quietly. But I want to be realistic about the limitations. I'm not 25 anymore, and some aspects of the role might need to be adjusted. The afternoon wore on with detailed discussions about logistics, security protocols, and media management. Each decision seemed to spawn 3 more questions, creating an increasingly complex web of considerations that needed to be addressed before any public announcement could be made. Lady Sarah, Camilla's private secretary, had joined a meeting to discuss the practical implications for the Queen Consort's existing commitments. Her calendar, normally planned months in advance, would need complete reorganization. The Literacy Charity Gala next month has already sold 800 tickets, Lady Sarah reported, reviewing her tablet. The Domestic Violence Awareness Campaign launches next week, and we have confirmed patronage visits scheduled through the end of the year. Can any of these be postponed or delegated? Sir Clive asked. Camilla shook her head firmly. The domestic violence campaign can't be delayed. We've been working with partner organizations for months, and postponing would affect their funding cycles and outreach programs. These women and children can't wait for our personal circumstances to improve. Her conviction on this point reminded everyone in the room that beyond the constitutional and logistical considerations, real people were affected by royal patronage and support. Camilla's charitable work wasn't just ceremonial. It provided tangible benefits to vulnerable populations who had come to rely on royal advocacy. Then, we'll need to plan around your existing commitments while adding the additional state responsibilities, Sir Clive concluded. It will be demanding, but manageable with proper support. As the sun began to set over London, casting long shadows through the study windows, the group had made significant progress in outlining potential scenarios. However, one crucial conversation remained, and Charles knew it couldn't be postponed any longer. We need to speak with William, Charles announced to the room. These decisions affect him more than anyone else, and he deserved to understand the full scope of what we're considering. The call was arranged through secure lines, with William joining from Kensington Palace, where he had been briefed by his own private secretary about the developing situation. Even through the encrypted connection, the weight of the conversation was palpable. "Father, how are you feeling?" William's voice carried genuine concern mixed with the controlled composure he had learned as second in line to the throne. Optimistic about the treatment, concerned about the timing, Charles replied honestly. "We're discussing various scenarios for maintaining royal duties during the treatment period, and some of them would significantly accelerate your timeline for taking on increased responsibilities." The silence that followed spoke volumes. William had been preparing for kingship his entire life, but, like his father before him, he had expected decades more of apprenticeship before assuming the crown. The prospect of dramatically expanding his role while his own children were still young presented challenges no amount of royal training could fully prepare him for. "What kind of timeline are we discussing?" William asked. "If we proceed with the temporary regency arrangement, you would begin assuming additional state duties within the month," Sir Clive interjected. "If abdication becomes necessary, the transition could occur within 6 months." Another pause, during which everyone in the room could almost hear William processing the implications for his own family. Catherine was already managing a full schedule of royal duties while raising 3 children. Adding the responsibilities of future queen consort would strain their carefully maintained balance between public service and family life. "Catherine and I will need to discuss the implications for our household," William said finally. "But, we'll do whatever is necessary to support the crown and the country." Camilla felt a surge of affection for her stepson. Despite any past difficulties or tensions within the family, William's response demonstrated the same sense of duty that had guided the royal family for generations. He was willing to sacrifice his own preferences for the good of the institution. "There's another option we should discuss," Charles said, his voice taking on a tone that suggested he had been thinking about this possibility throughout the afternoon. "Rather than rushing into permanent changes, we could implement a gradual transition that allows for my recovery while also preparing you for increased responsibilities." This middle path had appeal for everyone involved. It would provide the flexibility needed for medical treatment while avoiding the constitutional upheaval of abdication. It would also allow William and Catherine more time to adjust their family situation to accommodate expanded royal duties. "That makes sense," William agreed. "We could frame it publicly as a natural evolution of responsibilities rather than a crisis response." The conversation continued for another hour, with William asking detailed questions about the medical prognosis, the constitutional requirements, and the impact on various royal household staff and operations. His questions demonstrated both his understanding of royal responsibility and his concern for the people whose careers were intertwined with royal service. After the call concluded, the room fell into thoughtful silence. The afternoon's discussions had clarified many options, but the emotional weight of the decisions remained heavy for everyone involved. "I think we should proceed with the gradual transition approach," Charles announced to the room. "It provides the flexibility we need while maintaining institutional stability." Sir Clive nodded approvingly. "That approach also gives us more options if the medical situation changes, either for better or worse." Dr. Richardson consulted his notes before speaking. "From a medical standpoint, that timeline would work well. It allows for treatment to begin immediately while avoiding the stress of dramatic changes to His Majesty's role." As the advisors began packing their papers and planning next steps, Charles and Camilla found themselves alone in the study once again. The room felt different now, charged with decisions made and paths chosen, but also with uncertainty about what lay ahead. "Are you confident about this approach?" Camilla asked, settling back into her familiar chair. "As confident as I can be about something none of us has ever faced before," Charles replied. "But I believe it's the right balance between my medical needs and our duty to the crown." The evening light filtered through the study windows, painting everything in golden hues that softened the hard edges of the day's difficult discussions. Outside, London continued its evening routine, unaware that decisions made in this quiet room would soon reshape the monarchy they had known their entire lives. "There's something I need you to understand," Camilla said, her voice carrying a weight that hadn't been present in their morning conversation. "Taking on these additional responsibilities isn't a sacrifice for me. It's an opportunity to serve in a way I never expected to be able to." Charles looked at her with surprise and admiration. Throughout their marriage, Camilla had often downplayed her own capabilities and contributions, perhaps as a way of deflecting the criticism she had faced over the years. But her response to this crisis was revealing a strength and determination that even he hadn't fully recognized. "You've always been stronger than you give yourself credit for," he said. "But this will test that strength in ways neither of us can fully anticipate. Then we'll face those tests together," Camilla replied. "Just as we always have." The study clock chimed 7 times, marking the end of a day that had begun with uncertainty and progressed through difficult decisions toward a path forward. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, including the beginning of public announcements that would forever change how the world viewed their monarchy. But tonight, in the quiet of their private space, two people who had weathered many storms together prepared to face their greatest challenge yet. The weight of the crown had never been more apparent, but neither had their resolve to bear it with dignity and grace, whatever the personal cost might be. The public the morning of the announcement dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of Buckingham Palace's press office. Camilla stood before her dressing mirror, adjusting the elegant navy suit she had chosen for what would become one of the most significant public appearances of her life. The pearl necklace that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II rested against her throat, a tangible connection to the continuity of the monarchy even in times of change. Margaret moved around her with practiced efficiency, making final adjustments to her hair and ensuring every detail was perfect. Today, more than ever, appearance would matter. The cameras would scrutinize every expression, every gesture, searching for signs of fear, uncertainty, or weakness that might suggest instability within the royal family. "The car will be ready in 10 minutes, Your Majesty," Margaret informed her quietly. "His Majesty is already in the blue drawing room reviewing his remarks one final time." Camilla nodded, taking one last look at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her bore the confidence that came from years of public service, but she could also see the weight of new responsibility settling on her shoulders like an invisible crown. The past week had been a whirlwind of preparation. Press releases had been carefully crafted, constitutional experts consulted, and family members briefed. The announcement of Charles's diagnosis and the resulting adjustments to royal duties had been planned with the precision of a military operation, designed to maintain confidence while acknowledging the reality of the situation. Camilla made her way through the familiar corridors of the palace, past portraits of monarchs who had faced their own crises and challenges. She drew strength from their painted gazes, reminding herself that the institution of monarchy had survived wars, economic collapse, and family scandals. It would survive this too. The blue drawing room buzzed with controlled activity. Charles stood near the windows, his medical team having pronounced him fit for the public appearance despite the treatment he had begun earlier that week. His naval uniform, adorned with the medals and insignia of his various service roles, projected authority and continuity. But Camilla could see the subtle signs of fatigue that the treatment had already begun to impose. Sir Clive approached them with final updates from the communications team. "The press release went out 30 minutes ago," he reported. "Initial reactions are supportive, with most coverage focusing on His Majesty's commitment to transparency and continuity of service." The statement had been carefully worded to acknowledge Charles's health condition while emphasizing the strength of the monarchical institution and the royal family's commitment to their duties. It highlighted Camilla's expanding role as a natural evolution rather than a crisis response, framing the changes in positive terms of shared responsibility and partnership. "The Commonwealth realms have all been informed," Sir Clive continued. "Prime ministers across the realms have issued statements of support, and the governor-generals are prepared to address any constitutional questions that may arise." This international dimension added complexity to an already challenging situation. The United Kingdom was just one part of a broader Commonwealth monarchy, and each realm had its own constitutional requirements and public expectations. Maintaining unity and support across all 15 realms required careful diplomatic coordination. And the family? Camilla asked, knowing that the royal family's public unity would be crucial in the coming weeks. William and Catherine will appear at the Earthshot Prize ceremony tomorrow as scheduled, Sir Clive replied. Princess Anne has increased her patronage commitments for the next month, and Edward and Sophie are adjusting their calendar to provide additional coverage. The royal family's response demonstrated the institutional strength that had been built over decades. When one member faced challenges, others stepped forward to ensure continuity of service. This collective approach would be essential in maintaining public confidence during the transition period. A knock at the door announced the arrival of the palace photographer, who would document this historic moment for the official record. History would remember this day as a turning point, and every detail needed to be carefully preserved. Your Majesties, if you're ready, the communications secretary said softly. The press room is prepared. The walk to the press room felt longer than usual, though it covered the same distance Camilla had traveled hundreds of times before. Today, however, each step carried additional weight. By the time they emerged from this room, the world would know about Charles's condition and her expanded role. There would be no going back to the quiet privacy they had maintained around their personal struggles. The press room itself had been transformed for the occasion. Television cameras from major networks around the world were positioned to capture every angle, while photographers adjusted their lenses for the perfect shot. The assembled journalists represented not just British media, but international outlets that would carry news of the royal health crisis to every corner of the globe. Charles took his position at the podium with the confidence born of decades of public speaking. Beside him, Camilla stood with the poise that had gradually won over skeptical observers throughout her time in public life. Together, they presented an image of strength, partnership, and continuity that the communications team hoped would shape global coverage of their announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, Charles began, his voice carrying clearly through the microphones to the assembled media and the millions who would watch the recording later. I want to share with you some personal news that will affect how the Queen Consort and I approach our duties in the coming months. The room fell silent, except for the quiet whir of cameras. Every journalist leaned forward, knowing they were witnessing a historic moment that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. Following recent medical consultations, I've been diagnosed with a condition that requires a course of treatment over the coming months, Charles continued, following the script that had been refined through multiple drafts. My medical team is optimistic about the prognosis, and treatment has already begun. He paused, allowing the weight of this announcement to settle before continuing. The strategy was to address the health concern directly and honestly, while immediately pivoting to the strength and continuity of royal service. Throughout this period, I remain committed to serving as your king, but I will be adjusting my schedule to accommodate my treatment requirements. The Queen Consort will be taking on expanded responsibilities to ensure that our commitments to you, to the Commonwealth, and to the causes we serve continue without interruption. Camilla felt the weight of hundreds of cameras focused on her as Charles gestured in her direction. This was her moment to step forward into a role she had never sought, but was now embracing with determination. The Queen Consort has my complete confidence, Charles continued, and I know she shares my dedication to serving our country and the Commonwealth realms with the devotion and care you deserve. The formal announcement lasted only 10 minutes, but Camilla knew those 10 minutes would reshape public perception of her role within the monarchy. No longer would she be seen primarily as the king's supportive wife. She would be viewed as a leader in her own right, carrying significant responsibilities for the continuation of royal service. The question period that followed tested both their preparation and their composure. Journalists asked about the specific nature of Charles's condition, the timeline for his recovery, the constitutional implications of his reduced schedule, and the precedent their approach might set for future monarchs facing health challenges. Can Your Majesty share more details about your diagnosis? asked a correspondent from the BBC. While I believe in transparency with the British people, Charles replied, I also believe in maintaining some degree of personal privacy around medical matters. What I can tell you is that my condition is treatable. My doctors are confident about the outcome, and I am committed to following their guidance to ensure the best possible result. This balance between transparency and privacy had been carefully considered. The public had a legitimate interest in their monarch's health, but Charles and his medical team agreed that too much detail might create unnecessary alarm or speculation. Your Majesty, a journalist addressed Camilla directly. How do you feel about taking on these expanded responsibilities? This was the question Camilla had prepared for most carefully. Her answer would shape public understanding of her role and her commitment to service. I am honored by His Majesty's confidence and grateful for the opportunity to serve our country in this expanded capacity, she replied, her voice steady and confident. For years, I have been privileged to support the King's work and to develop my own charitable initiatives. Now I have the chance to bring that experience to a broader range of royal duties. She paused, allowing her sincerity to resonate before continuing. This is not a burden, but a privilege. The British people deserve consistency in royal service, and I am committed to providing that consistency while His Majesty focuses on his recovery. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from the impact on upcoming state visits to the constitutional precedents for shared royal responsibilities. Both Charles and Camilla handled the inquiries with the skill that came from decades of public experience, providing enough information to satisfy legitimate curiosity while maintaining appropriate boundaries around personal details. When the press conference concluded, they walked back through the palace corridors in thoughtful silence. The immediate challenge was over, but they both knew that the real work was just beginning. Public reaction would need to be monitored, schedules adjusted, and international partners reassured about the continuity of diplomatic relationships. I thought that went well, Charles said as they reached the privacy of the blue drawing room. The easy part is over, Camilla replied with a slight smile. Now we have to actually do what we just promised. The afternoon brought a flurry of activity as the Royal Communications team monitored global coverage of their announcement. Television networks interrupted regular programming to discuss the royal health crisis, while newspaper websites updated their headlines throughout the day. Social media buzzed with reactions ranging from support and sympathy to speculation and criticism. Lady Sarah arrived with initial reports from the monitoring team. Overall reaction appears positive, she informed Camilla. The major Commonwealth countries have issued supportive statements, and polling data suggests the public appreciates the transparency of the announcement. This initial positive reaction was encouraging, but Camilla understood that public opinion could shift quickly. The real test would come in the weeks ahead as she took on increased responsibilities, and the public evaluated her performance in this expanded role. There's been significant interest in your increased schedule, Lady Sarah continued. Requests for interviews and feature articles have already begun arriving, and several charitable organizations have reached out hoping to secure patronage meetings. The immediate spike in attention was both flattering and overwhelming. Camilla had spent years building her public profile carefully and gradually. The sudden elevation to this more prominent role meant everything would be accelerated and intensified. Dr. Richardson joined them for an early evening briefing on Charles's treatment progress. His presence served as a reminder that behind the public announcements and media coverage, a very real medical situation continued to unfold. His Majesty's first week of treatment has gone smoothly, Dr. Richardson reported. We're seeing the expected initial responses, and I remain optimistic about the long-term prognosis. However, the coming weeks will be crucial for establishing the treatment's effectiveness. This medical reality provided important context for all their planning. While they had announced a measured approach to adjusting royal duties, the situation remained fluid and might require additional changes if Charles's response to treatment differed from expectations. How will you monitor his progress while maintaining the public schedule? Dr. Richardson asked. We've built flexibility into the calendar, Sir Clive explained. Essential events will proceed as scheduled, but we have contingency plans for adjusting or postponing less critical commitments if medical needs require it. As evening approached, Charles and Camilla found themselves back in the study where their journey had begun just days earlier. The room felt different now, charged with the energy of decisions made and actions taken, but also with uncertainty about what lay ahead. "Any regrets about this afternoon?" Charles asked, settling into his favorite chair, with visible relief at the day's successful conclusion. "None," Camilla replied firmly. "I think we struck the right balance between honesty and reassurance. The public deserves to know what's happening, but they also deserve confidence that the monarchy will continue to serve them effectively." The evening news programs provided their first real glimpse of public reaction. Coverage was extensive and generally supportive, with constitutional experts praising their transparent approach and political leaders expressing confidence in the royal family's handling of the situation. The Queen Consort's expanded role represents a natural evolution of partnership within the modern monarchy, observed one constitutional historian during a television interview. This approach demonstrates both institutional strength and personal commitment to service. This type of positive commentary was exactly what the communications team had hoped to achieve. By framing the changes as evolution rather than crisis, they had successfully maintained confidence while acknowledging reality. But Camilla knew that positive initial coverage was just the beginning. The real measure of success would come in the months ahead as she navigated her expanded responsibilities while Charles focused on his recovery. The weight of the crown had never felt more real, but neither had her determination to bear it with dignity and grace. As the day drew to a close, she felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The storm had gathered, but they had weathered it together, and she was prepared to face whatever came next. #A new dawn. 6 months had passed since that momentous announcement, and the autumn morning light streaming through the windows of Windsor Castle's Oak Room carried a different quality than it had half a year ago. Camilla stood reviewing her schedule for the day, which included a state luncheon for the visiting Canadian Prime Minister, a patronage visit to a children's hospital, and an evening reception for Commonwealth ambassadors. The pace that had once seemed overwhelming now felt natural, almost comfortable. The transformation had not happened overnight. Those first weeks after the announcement had been challenging in ways she had never fully anticipated. Every public appearance was scrutinized for signs of uncertainty or weakness. Every decision was analyzed for its constitutional implications. Every gesture was interpreted as either confidence or desperation, depending on the observer's perspective. But somewhere in the midst of those early challenges, something had shifted. Perhaps it was the moment she had successfully negotiated a complex diplomatic situation during the Australian Prime Minister's visit, or when she had comforted families affected by flooding in northern England, speaking from the heart in a way that resonated deeply with the public. Whatever the exact turning point, she had found her footing in this expanded role in a way that surprised even her closest advisors. Charles entered the Oak Room with a vitality that had been missing during those difficult early days of treatment. The morning walks they now took together through Windsor's grounds had become a cherished routine, a time when they could discuss the day ahead and the challenges they continued to face together. "Dr. Richardson's latest report is very encouraging," Charles said, settling into the chair beside her desk. "He's quite pleased with my progress and believes we can begin gradually resuming some of the duties I've had to set aside." This news represented the milestone they had both been working toward. Charles's treatment had progressed better than anyone had dared to hope, and his energy levels were approaching normal ranges again. The careful balance they had struck between his recovery needs and royal responsibilities had proven successful. "How gradually are we talking?" Camilla asked, though she already suspected she knew the answer. They had both learned to be cautious about making dramatic changes too quickly. "Very gradually," Charles replied with a smile that acknowledged her thinking. "Dr. Richardson suggests we start with 1 or 2 additional engagements per week, monitoring how I respond before increasing further." The medical team's cautious approach had served them well throughout this period. By managing expectations and avoiding setbacks, They had maintained both Charles's health and public confidence in the monarchy's stability. Sir Clive arrived for their morning briefing, carrying the leather portfolio that had become a familiar sight over the past months. His reports had evolved from crisis management updates to routine administrative briefings, reflecting how successfully they had navigated the transition period. The Canadian visit appears to be proceeding smoothly, Sir Clive reported. Prime Minister Trudeau has expressed particular appreciation for Your Majesty's handling of the trade discussions during yesterday's private meeting. This diplomatic success represented the kind of achievement that would have been unthinkable for Camilla just a year earlier. Her expanded role had included taking on significant state responsibilities, including complex negotiations that traditionally would have been handled by the monarch himself. The Commonwealth ambassadors are looking forward to tonight's reception, Sir Clive continued. Several have specifically mentioned how much they value the continuity you've provided during this period of adjustment. The Commonwealth dimension had proven particularly important throughout Charles's treatment. The realms and territories had needed reassurance that their constitutional relationships with the Crown remained stable and strong. Camilla's successful management of these relationships had exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. There's also positive news from the polling data, Sir Clive added with a note of satisfaction. Your approval ratings have reached their highest levels ever, and public confidence in the monarchy overall has actually increased during the past 6 months. This statistical validation meant more to Camilla than any formal recognition could have. For years, she had faced criticism and skepticism about her place in the royal family. To see that her service during this challenging period had not just maintained, but actually increased public support felt like vindication of everything she had worked to achieve. Lady Sarah joined their briefing to discuss Camilla's charitable work, which had continued to expand even as she took on additional state responsibilities. The causes she championed had benefited from her higher profile, receiving increased attention and support from both the public and private sectors. The Literacy Foundation's latest report shows remarkable progress, Lady Sarah announced. Funding has increased by 40% since your expanded role began, and the program is now reaching children in communities that previously had no access to these resources. This tangible impact on people's lives provided the deepest satisfaction of all. Beyond the constitutional importance and diplomatic successes, Camilla's work was making a real difference in the lives of vulnerable children and families across the Commonwealth. The Domestic Violence Prevention Campaign has also seen significant growth, Lady Sarah continued. Your personal advocacy has helped secure legislative changes in 3 Commonwealth countries, providing better protection and support for survivors. These achievements represented years of careful relationship building and advocacy work finally reaching fruition. Camilla had always believed in using her platform to address serious social issues, but her expanded role had given her unprecedented influence to create meaningful change. The morning briefing concluded with plans for gradually transitioning some responsibilities back to Charles while maintaining the successful programs and relationships Camilla had developed. This process would require the same careful planning that had characterized their entire approach to this challenging period. I think we should proceed very slowly with any transitions, Camilla said thoughtfully. Some of the relationships I've built, particularly with the domestic violence organizations, depend on continuity of leadership. We shouldn't disrupt programs that are working well just to return to previous arrangements. Charles nodded approvingly. I've been thinking the same thing. Your work has been so successful that it would be a disservice to everyone involved to simply revert to our old division of responsibilities. This conversation represented a significant evolution in their partnership. Rather than returning to the previous status quo, they were actively choosing to maintain many of the changes that had proven beneficial. Camilla's expanded role would become a permanent feature of their approach to royal service. The afternoon brought the state luncheon with the Canadian Prime Minister, an event that demonstrated how naturally Camilla had grown into her expanded role. She moved through the diplomatic protocols with the confidence of someone who had hosted dozens of similar events over the past months. The nervous energy that had characterized her early appearances in this expanded capacity had given way to genuine expertise. Prime Minister Trudeau expressed his appreciation for her handling of the bilateral relationship during Charles's treatment period. Your Majesty's leadership during this time has strengthened our ties and demonstrated the enduring value of our constitutional connection, he said during his formal remarks. This kind of international recognition validated their approach to managing the transition. Rather than allowing uncertainty about Charles's health to weaken Commonwealth relationships, they had used the period to demonstrate the institutional strength and adaptability of the monarchy. The children's hospital visit that followed provided a different, but equally meaningful form of validation. Camilla had always been most comfortable in these informal settings, where her natural warmth and empathy could shine through without the formal constraints of state occasions. The children always ask for you specifically now, the hospital administrator mentioned as they toured the new pediatric wing. Your visits have become legendary among our patients and staff. This personal connection represented something that couldn't be manufactured or strategically planned. Over the months, Camilla had developed genuine relationships with the families and medical staff she regularly visited. Her expanded schedule had allowed her to spend more time with these causes that mattered most to her. One young patient, 8-year-old Sarah, had been following Camilla's visits through local news coverage. "Are you really the Queen?" she asked with the directness that only children possess. "I'm the Queen consort," Camilla explained patiently, "which means I'm married to the King, and I help him take care of our country. But you're also taking care of us here at the hospital," Sarah observed with remarkable insight. "Yes," Camilla agreed, moved by the child's understanding. "That's one of the most important parts of my job." This exchange reminded her why she had embraced the expanded role despite its challenges. The opportunity to directly impact lives, particularly the lives of vulnerable children, provided meaning that went far beyond constitutional duties or diplomatic responsibilities. The evening reception for Commonwealth ambassadors brought together diplomats from across the realms and territories for what had become a regular feature of Camilla's expanded role. These gatherings served both formal diplomatic purposes and informal relationship-building functions that had proven invaluable during the transition period. "Your Majesty," the High Commissioner from Australia approached during the reception, "I wanted to personally thank you for your handling of our constitutional questions during the King's treatment period. Your understanding of our unique situation was remarkable." This kind of feedback had been consistent throughout the months. Camilla's careful preparation and genuine interest in each realm's specific circumstances had won over even initially skeptical diplomats and government officials. The New Zealand ambassador added her own appreciation. "The continuity you've provided has been crucial for maintaining public confidence in our constitutional arrangements. Your approach has been both respectful of tradition and responsive to contemporary needs." As the evening progressed, Camilla found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed since that autumn morning when Charles first shared his diagnosis. The role she had assumed out of necessity had evolved into something that felt genuinely fulfilling and important. Charles joined the reception for its concluding portion, his presence serving as a visible reminder of his improving health and gradual return to full duties. But his arrival didn't diminish Camilla's central role in the evening's proceedings. Instead, it highlighted how successfully they had developed a true partnership in royal service. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles addressed the assembled diplomats, "I want to thank you all for your patience and support during my treatment period. But more than that, I want to acknowledge the remarkable service of Queen Camilla, who has not just maintained our Commonwealth relationships, but strengthened them in ways I could never have imagined." The spontaneous applause that followed this acknowledgement reflected genuine appreciation from diplomats who had worked closely with Camilla throughout the challenging months. Their reaction validated what opinion polls and media coverage had already suggested. Her expanded role had been not just successful, but transformational. As the reception concluded and the last guest departed, Charles and Camilla found themselves alone in the castle's blue drawing room, surrounded by the portraits and artifacts that represented centuries of royal history. The room had witnessed countless moments of triumph and crisis, adaptation, and continuity. 6 months ago, I thought this period would be about survival, Camilla reflected, settling into her favorite chair near the fireplace. I never imagined it would become about transformation. You've exceeded everyone's expectations, Charles replied. But, most of all, you've exceeded your own. The role you've created for yourself is something entirely new in royal history. This recognition meant more to Camilla than any formal honor could have. She had approached the expanded responsibilities with determination to serve effectively. But she had discovered capabilities and satisfactions she had never known she possessed. I don't think we should go back to the way things were before, she said quietly. Not completely. Some of what we've built during this period is too valuable to abandon. Charles nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking the same thing. Perhaps this crisis has given us an opportunity to evolve the monarchy in ways that will serve us well for decades to come. Their conversation continued late into the evening, planning not just for Charles's continued recovery, but for a new model of royal service that would incorporate the lessons and successes of the past months. The weight of the crown had been shared, and in that sharing, both had discovered strengths they hadn't known they possessed. Outside the castle windows, the lights of Windsor twinkled in the darkness, a reminder of the millions of people across the Commonwealth whose lives had been touched, directly or indirectly, by the quiet transformation that had taken place within these ancient walls. What had begun as a crisis had become a renewal. What had started as necessity had evolved into opportunity. As they prepared to retire for the evening, both Charles and Camilla understood that they had not just survived a challenging period, but had emerged stronger, more capable, and more committed to service than ever before. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that neither had imagined when this journey began, and they faced it together with confidence born of proven resilience and shared dedication to the crown they both served. The dawn that would break tomorrow would illuminate not just a new day, but a new chapter in the long history of the British monarchy, one written by two people who had discovered that the weight of the crown was lighter when shared with love, determination, and an unwavering commitment to service above self.